Thank you very much. With that, we can begin the meeting. The first call order of business is roll call, please.
Alderman Cone.
Present.
Alderman Ryan.
Here.
Commissioner Banton. Commissioner Boaz.
Present.
Commissioner Bradley. Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Garmendia.
Present.
Commissioner Keung.
Present.
Chair Strother.
Present.
And you have a quorum of 7.
Thank you very much. The next order of business is the approval of the minutes for March 8th, 2023. They've been sent out to all commissioners. I'll entertain a motion for approval.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes. Second.
Alderman Cone.
It's been moved by Commissioner Garmedia, second by Commissioner Boaz. Call for vote, please.
Alderman Cone.
Aye.
Alderman Ryan.
Aye.
Commissioner Boaz.
Aye.
Commissioner Kelly.
Aye.
Commissioner Garmendia.
Aye.
Commissioner Keung.
Aye.
Chair Strother.
Aye.
And the motion passes with all present voting aye.
Thank you very much. With that, I want to move the agenda forward. There is a change to the agenda as it was published. The first item that we'll be taking up is PDA 01523 ZTX. It will be presented by Miriam. Then we'll move to number 2 item informational. Number 3, we'll look at chapter 99. Number 4, the comprehensive plan. So the number 1, we'll call for the public hearing at the appropriate time. I will turn the podium over to Miriam to make that presentation. It's all yours.
All right, thank you, Chair and members of the Commission. I'll wait one moment while we get to the appropriate part of the presentation.
And while she's doing that, if you want to speak at the public hearing, this would be your time to place your name and the organization that you're representing or the entity and in the chat. So please do so at this time if you're going to ask to be spoke for public hearing. Go ahead with that, Miriam. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So this item is a review of a proposed amendment to the zoning code. And as such, as the chair said, we'll be holding a public hearing this evening. The proposed amendment before the Planning Commission deals with short-term rentals. At the highest level, next slide, please. It establishes a number of key definitions associated with short-term rentals as a land use and permits the use in all districts, but subject to additional regulations. And let me describe what I mean by that. So these zoning amendments before you this evening would be conditional upon a second set of regulations dealing with short-term rentals, including the establishment of a permitting process. These other regulations are currently being refined. A board bill has not yet been introduced. While the zoning text amendment is a subject of the Commission's review this evening, the other proposed regulations are not, but of course they're related, so we'll address those at a high level. And just for a little quick reference throughout this discussion, our zoning code is in Title 26 of the city's revised code, and Title 25 deals with buildings and construction. Next slide, please. So what are the definitions? There are 9. And each of these defines a core concept associated with this use. And many of these are then referenced or will then be referenced in those other regulations regarding permitting and licensing. So I'll quickly discuss each. The first definition is simply of a short-term rental as a use, distinct from other lodging uses and for a rental term of 30 days or fewer, so short-term. Short-term rental agent is a person or organization designated on the permit as the contact person who would be that responsive party at all times. Short-term rental owner is simply the property owner. Short-term rental permit would be the permit issued by the building division and subject to the requirements outlined in that second set of regulations I referenced. Short-term rental owner occupied is a unit, a dwelling unit, and we'll define that in a minute for the purposes of this proposed regulation, a dwelling unit with that's rented as a short-term rental, also used as a principal residence by the owner or tenant. A non-owner occupied short-term rental unit is not used as a principal residence by owner or tenant. So, imagine me buying a building down the street and operating it as a short-term rental. That would be a non-owner occupied short-term rental. Short-term rental unit is a dwelling unit or accessory building used as a short-term rental. A dwelling unit would be a room or group of rooms, just for the purposes of this chapter being introduced as proposed regulation here tonight. And a sign, just for the purposes of this chapter, is anything used as an announcement, direction, advertisement, or attention-getting device related to the short-term rental. Next slide, please. So also, like I said, this proposed text amendment would allow short-term rentals as a permitted use in every zoning district, but subject to those additional regulations. So those additional regulations really comprise the bulk of the regulatory framework for short-term rentals that's being contemplated. And given that, next slide, please, I will just briefly describe what is in those drafted regulations. But we have with us tonight Frank Oswald, the city's building commissioner, who will be able to answer commissioner questions about those other proposed regulations in much greater detail than I can. So the proposed amendments to Title 25, again, outside of the zoning code, would require the designation of a short-term rental agent as defined in the zoning amendment tonight, require a city permit, a short-term rental permit for the operation of a short-term rental, which would be renewed annually, as well as a process for appealing that permit's denial in that process. It would require a graduated business license for non-owner occupied short-term rentals to be granted a permit, and it would set a number of other conditions on the operation of short-term rentals. So quickly, you may be wondering why short-term rentals are proposed to have this two-part regulatory structure and why more isn't being handled in the zoning code or Title 26 itself. And in brief, Title 25, which addresses buildings and construction, allows for a much more expedient and responsive permit revocation process than is possible under processes governing zoning under Missouri state law. So the idea here is that there should be an expedient path for resolving issues that may arise with short-term rentals. Imagine a party house that becomes problematic or other behavior issues. The building commissioner's powers really allow the city to be more responsive to revoking a permit in that type of circumstance than the zoning code itself would. So just a little more context about why we have this kind of two-part regulatory thought here. Next slide, please. But thinking again about the land use side of the coin, we wanted to provide a little more context about how this use, to the best of our knowledge, is operating in our city today. And for this analysis and this map, we used AirDNA data, which is a third-party data source which aggregates kind of scrapes data from Airbnb and VRBO, the two major short-term rental listing services, and pulls it all together for view by body. So that's our data source for this. And as you can see, to the best of our knowledge, short-term rentals unregulated today are currently operating in every zoning district, excluding L, Jefferson Memorial, and seem to be most prevalent in areas zoned A, single-family dwelling, B, two-family dwelling, and C and D, multiple-family dwelling districts. Next slide, please. And when we do that same overlay of the listing data we have access to, we can also see that they're operating in all strategic land use plan areas as well, excluding that designation we basically use for parks. And they're most prevalent in areas designated neighborhood preservation area and specialty mixed use area. As you can see from the map with this data we found, they're also somewhat more prevalent in areas near employment centers, near entertainment amenities, and other tourism destinations, which makes sense. and therefore they're somewhat more dense or concentrated in certain parts of the city, such as the Central West End, Forest Park Southeast, downtown, and Soulard. And I'll add briefly that it's really difficult with available data to really quantify the prevalence of short-term rentals as they're operating today in the city as a whole. But I think moving forward with these regulations in place and compliance mechanisms, it would help with that. Next slide, please. Briefly, before turning it over to Mary Hart Burton with the zoning section to add any comments, I want to share a few staff comments on land use considerations. So first, short-term rentals really, can fit within the character of a broad range of strategic land use plan designations and land uses. Even within neighborhood preservation areas, for example, they play a role, can play a role in supporting neighborhood commercial and even in preservation of the existing housing stock. And of course, they are quite complementary to major employment centers, entertainment amenities, and so on, providing both temporary housing for individuals considering a job, and so on. In other cities, short-term rentals have been found to compete with long-term rental or home ownership opportunities. In the case here, we don't yet know what those trends and impacts are, but a clear system for defining, permitting, and regulating short-term rentals would allow for ongoing evaluation of the impacts, both positive and negative. So next slide, please. With that, I'll invite Mary Hart Burton, the city's zoning administrator, to add any further comments or fill in anything I may have missed in my presentation.
Thanks, Miriam. Would you mind very much going back to the slide that had the definitions? Everything about your presentation was fine. I just want to make a clarification. While there are 9 definitions on that list, only 7 of those definitions are new to the zoning code. And those are the first 7 that deal specifically with short-term rental. The dwelling unit definition is the same definition that we have in the zoning code. We felt like it was important to put that up front in the short-term rental because that dwelling unit definition does include that the unit have a kitchen and bathroom facility. And that's how we can ensure that a short-term rental wouldn't apply as a hotel and then turn into a short-term rental, because typically the hotels wouldn't have the full kitchen in them. Also, the sign definition is the same definition of a sign that we have in a code. It's just in this ordinance because of the way the numbering will change when we add short-term rental, the sign numbering will move. So that's the only reason we're not changing anything about the definition of a sign with the code. And that's all I have to add unless any of the commissioners have any questions.
Thank you, Mary. We'll call it when we get to that. We'll see. Again, this is a public hearing. There will be a public hearing in a moment. If you have questions, please sign up in the chat. Greg Oswald, was there anything that you wanted to add prior to us getting to that?
No, not at this time. I feel like Miriam and Mary has done a really good job on this. Essentially, the only thing I would add is that, we don't have the whole regulatory process down, but essentially what we're looking at doing is providing a system in which owners could go online, they could apply for it online, they could pay for it online, and basically we would issue the permit online. We'd have dedicated people who would work on this and be able to, keep an eye on it. And as Miriam had said, we would be in a situation to take pretty immediate action in the event that somebody would be abusing privileges.
Okay, I appreciate that. With that, then the first thing I'll do is I'll call for a motion to open the public hearing.
You skip back to that slide.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion to open by Tracy Boaz, a second by Commissioner Garmedia. Call for vote.
Alderman Cone. Alderman Cone. Alderman Naran,
Alderman
Commissioner
Ryan,
Commissioner Banton, Commissioner Boaz,
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Garmendia,
Aye.
Commissioner Keung,
Aye.
Chair Strather,
aye.
Alderman Cone,
Aye.
Alderman Naran, and the motion passes with 7 voting aye.
Thank you very much. At this point, the public hearing is open. I am calling for any names at this point. The chair sees none in the chat. Call number 1 for public statements, seeing none in the chat. Call number 2 for public hearing statements, seeing none in the chat. Call number 3 for statements in the chat, not seeing any names identified. I will first check with the staff to be ensure that I'm not missing anyone. Staff, is there anyone missing for public statements?
Nobody missing.
Okay, with that, there are no public statements needed to be made at this point. Call for motion to close the public hearing.
So moved, Commissioner Chung.
So second, Commissioner Bradley.
Been moved by Commissioner Kong, second by Commissioner Bradley. Call for vote.
Alderman Cone,
Abstain.
Alderman Ryan, Commissioner Banton, Commissioner Boaz,
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Garmendia,
Aye.
Commissioner Keung,
Aye.
Chair Strather,
Aye.
and the motion passes with 6 ayes and 1 abstention.
With that, the public hearing is closed. At this point, I would entertain any questions from the commissioners, beginning with Commissioner Cone. Alderman Cone, if there are any questions to the staff at this point.
Sure. I guess one of my questions is regarding the definitions. Is an owner occupied unit considered, like, so if someone has a 4-family and one of the units is occupied by an owner, is that considered owner occupied, or is that non-owner occupied?
Who would answer that question? Mary or staff? Or Greg?
Mary, do you have a thought? I might defer to you here.
Right. So I just want to make sure I understand the question, Alderman Cohen. So did you say if it's a 4-family and the owner lives in 1 unit, is it considered owner occupied?
I presume it, 4-family, 20 unit, if the owner lives in the building,
Mm-hmm.
because there is no distinction between the size of units and any of the definitions here. So if the owner lives in the building, but not in the unit, is it considered a owner occupied unit? Because I think.
So I think the way the definition is written, it talks about the owner being the principal residential dwelling unit.
Can whoever's updating the slides go back to the definitions page while we're talking about this, please? Sorry, Mary.
That's okay.
Yeah, short-term rental owner occupied.
Right. So that you guys understand, I think what Miriam did here is she just sort of summarized the definition. This little page doesn't have the definitions word for word. Word for word, they're in the draft that was attached in the Planning Commission packet. So the whole definition of that short-term rental owner occupied says that it means it's a principal residential dwelling unit that is occupied by the resident who may either be the owner or the tenant leasee of the owner and authorized by the owner to offer the unit for short-term rental. A resident can only have one principal residence. So there's a lot more to the definition than what we have up here.
Okay, so the owner, if it's like a 20-unit building, they live in one of the units, they can, it sounds like they would be permitted to rent out other units that they're not living in, but are in the same building.
Short-term rental owner occupied.
I don't know. I kind of have the different take on that, Christina, because it sounds like there's the definition sounds very specific to the unit and not the building.
I agree.
So
I would agree with that also, because of this very last sentence that says a resident can have only one principal residence. So I didn't craft the definition, so I'm gonna take a stab at this. I think the intent of this was to define a short-term rental where the owner is there at the same time.
Yeah, it sounds like it's
Right, okay.
a single family unit versus even a duplex.
So that would be different than if you just went on VRBO and you rented a whole house. This is talking about when, I guess, you just rent out a space inside of your unit that you live in.
units are different. Units are different than buildings.
Yes.
Unit is a portion of a building, generally speaking. So are we using the term unit to define a building, or are we using it to define an apartment within a building?
Well, we have a definition for the unit. And that definition says a short-term rental unit shall mean a dwelling unit used as a short-term rental, as well as an accessory building used as a short-term rental.
Shane, this is Frank Oswald, if I could jump in a minute.
Yeah,
Generally, we consider it each unit as an independent. And, you know, if you own a 4-family and you happen to live in that one, that would be your one unit, but you would certainly be eligible to rent out the others. I don't think all the specifics have been worked out yet on what those regulations are going to be and how many. And that, to a great degree, is really going to be up to the board, you know, within the board bill. Yeah. So, you know, I think this is something that has to be worked out in the legislation and the regulations, actually.
I'm seeing in the draft ordinance bill that the concern that Alderman Cone brought up.
Yes.
is, if you look at how the draft board bill is written, the definition of short-term rental owner occupied, it kind of clarifies in there that
I want to go back to Alderman Cone, though. I'm not sure we gave him an answer or the answer is sufficient. I just want to clarify where we are with that for you, Alderman Cone.
No, I'm still not clear on the definitions.
Okay. So at this point, then I ask the staff, how do we define or refine this answer so that we can have a solution to this question between Greg Oswald and, I guess, not Mary in this case. So how do we get this definition, or who is responsible for this definition?
Well, again, I think that, you know, each unit is an independent unit. That's how we look at all of this. In housing conservation, for example, each of those units would have to have an inspection and be considered an individual unit. I don't think it's any different in this situation.
So if someone has a 2-family
Mhm.
or an additional dwelling unit on the back of their house, they want it as a short-term rental, the other
Right.
unit not occupied, it would not be considered an owner-occupied dwelling unit. Even though it's the same building or same parcel of land.
Right,
That the-
right now,
Right.
the way, and I don't think the board bill defines it one way or another yet at this point. I'm not positive on that, but that's, I think, one of the things that has to be worked out within the legislation yet.
But
And
we're voting on definitions here. They should be clear.
And I agree, but what I'm looking at, Alderman Cohen, I'm looking at this, the second line to that short-term owner occupied, where it says the owner and authorized by the owner to offer the unit for a short-term rental. So if you are in one building, as in your scenario, you live in one, you have the second unit available and let's say a mother-in-law's house in the back. If you have authorized by the owner to then do a short-term rental on unit B, is how I'm reading that, because of that last statement. It says the owner and authorized by the owner to offer the unit. That's how I'm reading this now. How do we get clear? How do we get legal clarification is my question at this point.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. Tonight, what the Planning Commission is doing is recommending regulations that are in the resolution. So the board bill, which is attached, really the regulations, and those are, the definitions are also reflected on page 2 of the resolution. So just kind of clarifying that those are some of the things, under the Planning Commission's review tonight. Also, I noticed on the Zoom, and Mary, I'll defer to you, but I think Evan in your office had a hand raised. I don't know, Evan, if that's still relevant based on where the discussion has gone, but.
No, I was trying to help clarify some of the definitions maybe, but part of it is the kind of chapter 25 portion that regulates it and isn't before the commission at this point. So when we look at, there will be some dwelling units that are owner occupied, and then they may own the building, but rent out dwelling units that are not occupied by them, which is why there's separate definitions for those items. But I don't know if that helps clarify things for you, Shane, at all, but I think the idea of the breadth of definitions is that there will be some of these types of rental units that might be somebody's living there, somebody owns it but doesn't live there, and so forth.
And
But there's like
ahead.
almost the third classification though of like an ADU or a multifamily where someone lives. Would also be a different concern. So because the owner is still at that property.
Yeah, yes, I understand. So the owner is at that property. An accessory building is something that is defined in our zoning code, which is why it was added to what a short-term rental unit is. And in that instance, I think we would regulate it as owner occupied, since accessory dwelling is supplemental to the primary use of that property.
And
Are you just hoping for stronger clarity, like stronger wording? Clarify it.
yeah, I think we need to be clear with definitions when we're passing them. I don't think that they should be left up to interpretation.
Can I make a suggestion?
And the recommendation is saying the zoning text change to add a new chapter establishing definitions pertaining to short-term rentals. So I'm trying to be sure, are we recommending these changes or are we recommending them to the Board of Aldermen to make changes? I'm misunderstanding the recommendation here.
We would be recommending specific regulations to the Board of Aldermen for their consideration.
Commissioner Garmedia, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. My recommendation to clarify the definitions, and I'm looking at the longer version too, is to add the word unit at the end. Because the intent of in the board bill will be permitting short-term rental in both short-term rental owner occupied units as well as short-term rental non-owner occupied units that may be in an owner occupied building. So I would recommend adding the word unit to the end of the term that's being defined. I think that would make it mirror the short-term rental unit definition that's being added. I think it retains the intention of the
So-
professionals involved, but I think that would provide clarification that in the job of the Board of Aldermen, when it comes time, will be to regulate, to say that they're permitting or not permitting, short-term rental in both types, which would encompass the scenario that Alderman Cohn is talking about.
So on definition of short-term rental owner occupied, you want to add the word unit after it says only one principal resident unit.
No, in the term, short-term rental owner occupied unit.
Okay, in the unit. Okay, gotcha. I'm sorry, misunderstood. Thank you.
What I see is on page 2 of the resolution, that would be 3E and F. We would be adding unit
Mhm.
to the end of those new definitions.
Yes.
Okay.
Alderman Cone, does that address your concern with that?
I'm honestly not sure if it does, but
Because I do think the scenario is also that in the board bill, I think we're going to be asking for when people are filling out this paperwork application that they're clarifying whether they're offering up a unit that they personally live in or whether it's a unit in their building that they don't occupy. So they could be offering both or one or the other.
but again, the
it's
third
not-
classification, which is a unit that's in a building that they occupy.
And I think for our place here, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead with the finishing questions of the commission and go through those, and then we can come back to what the next steps would be, because we could sit here and wordsmith this through the process. So just bear with me a moment. Commissioner Anders, I'm sorry, Alderman Orion, any questions at this point that have not been raised?
No questions at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Anderson,
No questions at the moment.
Commissioner Boaz?
I actually kind of wanted to follow up on Chair Strouder's question. So we are approving the language that is attached that is noted as draft?
We're actually, well, and by we, not me, but the Planning Commission, you all are reviewing the resolution, which is, pages 1 through 5 in this item. The draft board bill is, we often attach, because it's helpful context for how these proposed regulations might be captured in proposed legislation, but it's really the resolution that is the Planning Commission's subject of review. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks for that clarification.
Is that any more questions, Commissioner Bellis?
I don't think so.
Okay, Commissioner Bradley?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Garmedia, any other additional questions? You're muted. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, can we, I would like to ask if there was any consideration for defining a short-term rental building at all during the development of this list of definitions that we're being asked to approve.
Okay, short-term rental building. Commissioner Young.
No question.
Okay. All right. So with that, we have two basic questions and they rest on the definitions. Commissioner Garmedia once talked about short-term buildings and Alderman Cone is concerned about the short-term ownership. Now, if I'm understanding correctly, please correct me.
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Alderman Cone.
yeah, I never really did get to finish all of my questions here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we will entertain your questions, Commissioner Cone. Alderman Cone, thank you.
So I guess piggybacking off of Commissioner Garmendia's question here, was there any consideration given to adopting this by zoning classification as well? So, single family, zoning would have one definition or requirements, two-family dwelling district would have another definition or requirements. Maybe the definition is the same, but the requirements change per, zoning area.
Frank or Mary? Do you have thoughts?
I was not involved in the discussion, so I can't really comment on that. Frank, you were involved
Yeah.
from the beginning.
There's been a lot of discussion on doing this. Basically, the overriding idea was that the administration generally feels that it should be allowed in all the various districts, and their feeling is that we should be able to, police it through the building division, because we once again have the ability to condemn a property, in the event that it is something that is really super problematic and they violate the rules. So, sorry. So that's kind of where it was, how it's developed, Shane.
So I'm not necessarily saying that we necessarily would restrict by a particular zone. I mean, most of the feedback that I've heard from people with problems around short-term rentals are either in a single family dwelling district or they're downtown. Most of the complaints that I've gotten are like from people who either live or own properties in downtown. And, there's apartment buildings down there that, they just rent these things out. And so, it seems to me as though those are probably the most quote unquote problematic that, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have rules and regulations for all of the zones. I think we should, which is kind of going back to my original question here. But, and some of them, it might be prudent to be a little bit more restrictive with respect to these, types of things. And there's different, scenarios, particularly when you are talking about, places like downtown. And so I don't have a concern with it being permitted in each area, but I think that we should try to at least address some of the concerns that might be, brought to our attention in some of these other areas.
Yeah, and that's why I've said, I think all the specifics as far as rules, regulations, and the location of each area, is still somewhat subjective, dependent upon what is passed by the alderman. Obviously, you guys get, a ton of input on that stuff.
But the planning commission is going to be making this recommendation to the Board of Aldermen.
Right.
But essentially, you're recommending that the allowance of, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're recommending the allowance of having, the process of having short-term rentals codified and controlled by the city of St. Louis.
That's, if I'm reading the recommendation, that's not what the recommendation is, though. And if I'm wrong, please correct me for this to the staff. It sounds like one of the clarifying things is that we must have a much tighter definition panel, because that's what we're recommending to the Board of Aldermen. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, what is certainly the case is that it is, the item before the Planning Commission tonight are these specific regulations in Title 26, which is the zoning code. There will be, these may be refined by the Board of Aldermen, but the recommendations tonight would be the specific content of this resolution. And there are additional regulations being contemplated, as Commissioner Oswald described, for Title 25 that are not the subject tonight, and those are relevant, but not for review tonight.
So are those recommended, and I guess I'm asking, Greg, are those coming back to us as a commission, or do they go directly to the board?
They'll go directly to the clerk of the Board of Aldermen.
I'm saying the other.
No, they will not come before the Planning Commission. The Title 25 regulations will not.
Will not.
Sure, I'm sorry. I wasn't intending to be here this evening, but I was told that you all were short a quorum. So I'm actually at another engagement on, on my phone, trying to ask these questions and be engaged and present. But do we need to be voting on this today, especially if there's another, resolution from Title 26 that is related, but not currently before us today? And also, we've got two alder people that are on the Planning Commission, who, both got reelected, but we don't know what chairs they're going to be holding in the new session. So it almost seems like it would be appropriate to wait until the new board gets sworn in.
And I do agree with the fact that we don't have to take an action on it today, because there is too much ambiguity in the definitions. And that would be a motion I would entertain from the commission, either to, I don't know if the proper term is table it, or to hold off to next meeting with clarified definitions.
So I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. When I asked that question, I thought I heard someone say, yes, we had to pass it today. Maybe I misheard.
So I can provide a clarification. What we did definitely want to do was hold a public hearing tonight, which we've done. This
Right.
commission discussion, we can take into account, you revise this resolution to provide more clarity, and this item could be tabled to a future Planning Commission meeting if that was the commission's preference.
Commissioner Garmedia, I see your hand up again.
Thank you. I would be in support of tabling this and coming back to it. The other suggestion I would have, or I also would like explanation for, do we really need definitions for short-term rental, owner occupied, short-term rental, non-owner occupied? Because it's confusing to say, have the short-term rental of it when they're all, it's single family building, or it's a unit in a duplex, a unit in a multifamily, that it's not a short-term rental recognized by the city unless it has the permit. And so it would be a unit blank with a short-term rental permit. And so I'm just not sure, what's not provided in the presentation so far has been the clarification that we need those definitions and why we need them. And why we need them approved by the Planning Commission, and they needed to be in the zoning code. So that's the additional suggestion I have. If we're going to table this, if we could come back with just a little more clarification of why it has to be in the zoning code, if it does need to be in there,
Right.
or if we can do without it, and be using the existing pieces of the zoning code.
Okay, the answer is that what we did, Alderman Cohen, was we did have to do the public hearing, which we have done and met that qualification.
Sure.
At this point. Based off the questions I'm hearing, I would entertain a motion then at this point from the commissioner.
Chair Strata, before we go to a motion, can I just
Yes.
ask a clarifying
yes.
question?
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner.
Frank, you had said something that I just wanted to better understand. I don't remember your exact wording, so please correct me if I get any of this wrong, that this was a pathway for the Board of Aldermen to then be able to introduce a short-term rental board bill ordinance, sorry, not ordinance, board bill this upcoming session. So does this process need to occur first in order for the Board of Aldermen to be able to talk about it? And is there any critical reason why it should be passed tonight versus waiting a month?
Frank, if you want to take the first whack, this is Don. I'll help clarify that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know that there's anything critical that has to happen tonight from our end, but what we always try to do is whenever there's something that involves the planning commission, there is the requirement, that it's heard there first before it goes to the board, whenever it affects the zoning code. And there were certain sections of this that, we wanted to set up definitions and stuff like that, that do mildly, be addressed in the zoning code. But the bulk of the, the work is really going to be within the building, division for setting up the process as a whole. And that's the type of work that, may be modified somewhat by the board, based upon the recommended ordinance that, draft ordinance that we have. Go ahead, Don.
Good evening, folks. So 2 things. Frank is reminding us that there are ultimately two pieces of legislation that will be before the Board of Aldermen and voted on by the Board of Aldermen. One is dealing with Chapter 26, which is the definition portion of this. And that's reviewed tonight by you members of the Planning Commission. You can make some modifications of this regarding this part of it. We can have a motion to say, like for the Planning Commission to look at revising these definitions and bringing them back at the next meeting for you to continue to work on what's expected to be in 26, but clarify it and have it be to your liking. That can happen because there is not a time commitment for us to pass this, but it would mean that it would happen in mid-May and then have to be in sync with the Board of Aldermen to move along. The items in 25, Chapter 25, which Frank is talking about, is in a separate category, a separate part of the code, and that part of the code for revision do the things that Frank has been talking about in terms of regulating and being able to affect and make change when people misbehave and operating their short-term rental would not be coming before the Planning Commission. So tonight, if you'd like to make a motion that we carry this forth to the next Planning Commission meeting with some instructions as to what you're hoping to see clarified for next month in terms of these definitions, that would be helpful. We'd come back next month with that. But the items that I've talked about as being changes in Chapter 25 that address a number of the concerns are, yes, concerns that are out there, but they would not be a part of the zoning code for us to take up.
And I can maybe offer a summary of the specific concerns or questions I've heard as potential instructions for us to address in more detail at the next meeting. I think first from Christina Garmendia, a little bit more background about why these definitions need to be in the zoning code at all as a basis for broader regulation. Really drilling down on the short-term rental owner-occupied versus non-owner-occupied definition, making sure those are clear and well understood and And then the additional question I heard is does a definition of short-term rental building merit consideration?
Thank you. That is a recap. Again, Don gave us, clarified for us. And Frank, let me apologize. I've been saying Greg all morning, all afternoon. I don't know why. I've been in a Brady Bunch or something. With that,
No problem.
with that, again, the commissioner, I will entertain any motion, and we have those options to table the conversation, asking for clear definitions. The requirement that we did have to do, which was the public hearing, has been met. And I think we have staff has the appropriate direction to reframe some of the language that is in question. So I would entertain a motion if that is what is best, the choice of the commission.
Could I make the motion, but also add a request for planning staff?
Yes.
I think we're fairly late to the game on this, in terms of communities that have already enacted these regulations. So I just would like to, in the presentation here, kind of what you've taken from either American Planning Association, National League of Cities, or something like that, so we understand a little bit more of the background behind it. And I would move that we do carry it over to the next meeting.
It's been moved that we carry.
Phone.
Been moved by that we carry it over to the next meeting with, and if I made it to the, and with clarified definition, seconded by Alderman Cone, call for vote.
Alderman Cone,
Aye.
Alderman Ryan,
The carryover, okay.
Aye.
Commissioner Boaz,
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Gormendia,
Aye.
Commissioner Keown,
Aye.
Chair Strather,
Aye.
and the motion passes with all present voting aye to table to further commission meeting.
To carry it over to the next meeting.
Yes.
And the staff has the marching orders of what commissioners are looking for, and Don has some language.
Joe, just as we end this, I have confirmed with our attorney present that we can use the word carryover as the same definition of table to the next meeting.
Thank you, Don. I knew there was some language there again. With that, the next item on the agenda to be discussed will be an informational item, which will be presented by Andrew of SLDC. Am I correct?
That's correct. And I might give him a quick intro before he presents, a real quick one. Just the context here about the request for this presentation. So the blighting study and redevelopment plan, that is the next action item on the agenda, is the first time that the commission will be seeing a blighting study and redevelopment plan that's been reviewed through this new community benefits scorecard process. And so we thought it would be helpful to have the context for all commission members of what that process is, just as an informational item. So yeah, with that, yeah, thank you, Andrew Knopp, for being with us, and take it away.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Mary. Yes, I work for SLDC, but I went to planning school, so I would say it's good to be in a space where it's densely populated with planning minds. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of like incentives more broadly in our kind of like process we've been undergoing, but mainly it's to talk about the community benefits scorecard. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we've been undergoing for a while a process to kind of reform our policy and analytical tools surrounding incentives. And so this is kind of laying out the landscape there. So for a while now, we've, while we've always tried to be responsive to feedback and criticisms and things we've received from various stakeholders, there's a couple of themes that consistently emerged. One is that incentives should be a tool really for mainly focused on public benefit and not just a financial gap filler. So this kind of relates to being responsible with the fact that we're foregoing property taxes and other things which can affect the school district and other taxing districts. And that also the development community and the public as well both desire a clear and predictable method of incentive evaluation. So while we were open about how we did things previously, it may not have been very accessible to people to see how we analyze projects. And also as we kind of started to shift maybe a year or so ago towards more of community benefits oriented things, it became unclear, especially to developers, how they could assess themselves before getting into negotiations with us. So what we did to kind of combat that was we entered into a contract with Baker Tilly to assess our financial model, as well as develop the community benefits scorecard, and also just look at our process in general and come up with a new process for us. So the results of that were they did extensive feedback sessions with the development community, Board of Aldermen, the public schools, CDCs and neighborhood groups, PDA, as well as others. And not only just did they have sessions up front, once they came up with some of their deliverables and we gave our feedback on those deliverables, we also solicited feedback from these parties once again to kind of help us iterate and come closer to where we are right now. And in particular, PDA was very helpful, gave us a ton of feedback, and I would say it really helped us get to where we are at now. So we got a new incentive process as well. We have a new financial model, although it was tweaked in a couple minor ways, and some of the more substantial ways are in kind of how it's presented to the public. The dashboard itself is hopefully a little bit more understandable to most people. And then they also created for us a new fiscal analysis report, which is in much more detail. And if somebody desires to get into the weeds on each project, it's laid out in a report form that they can do that. And obviously the community benefits scorecard. So going forward, we hope to just keep improving our process. We're going to evaluate the scorecard and evolve it over time. We've been very clear with everyone that we definitely expect this to change. It's kind of a tough thing to put into a scorecard perfectly. And so I think we need to kind of see how projects come in and take feedback from people and periodically release changes to it. And then generally we want to be more transparent. We've been continuing to be, push towards that. We know that we've been asked to be more transparent and accountable. And I threw in here digital because we have a new website at SLDC, plan to put a lot of resources out there about the process and projects that have gone through the process, including the reports and scorecards for the public and other people to find. And also we're creating right now a developer portal in which applications will go through. Developers will also have a little bit more visibility into the process and be able to interact with us in a digital way more so than before. You can go on the next slide. So the new process, I'll go over this pretty quick, and this is in the longer scorecard that was sent to you previously. So the new process will be someone applies, and then the first step after that is they must be assessed. The project must be assessed according to the community benefits scorecard. So this is kind of a new shift in how we do things. They have to kind of pass the scorecard first before we even get into the financials. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but then we go to the rate of return analysis, cost benefit analysis. It's, this basically exactly the same type of analysis as we had been doing previously with our financial model. We'll also be vetting developers. Obviously we'll negotiate. Another thing, and it's important to note, is that we have kind of formalized that there must be some level of engagement on our projects, where before it was a little bit more nebulous as to what was required. Sign an agreement, and then we have post issuance kind of reporting and compliance that'll be required of developers. And we've hired a new staff person on our team here recently that'll help us with developer vetting and also the reporting and compliance piece. So next slide. So now the next several slides are all about the scorecard itself. And on the left side, we've kind of got like higher kind of like thematic things that we think the scorecard achieves. And so first and foremost, it puts community benefits first. So something that benefits the community outside of just, a project happening. It's hopefully more clear and predictable. It's set up in a way that, and we're making a tool as well that developers can almost go score projects themselves. online, so they have a better expectation as to where their current development plans would sit, and then how they might need to tailor that to get to the level of abatement that they might be thinking that they need. It tells us more of the why projects should be receiving incentives, so kind of like the story behind it. So if there's a project that has good transit access and provides some level of affordable housing, and also will be remediating some environmental condition, outside of just talking about numbers and the financials, that helps communicate why this would be valuable to complete. And similarly to that, this is a menu of options that we consider to be valuable. So developers can come in, they might not think that they're at the level of abatement that they think they need financially. There's a number of options that we find valuable that they can choose from. And so we hope that they do choose from those, because we value those things actually happening rather than the project dying completely. So there's a little bit more of like working together and mutually beneficial relationship, hopefully. The scoring categories hopefully incorporate planning principles and values, transit access, affordable housing, mixed uses, mixed income, density, that kind of thing. And it complements other initiatives. So we at SLDC obviously have released Economic Justice Action Plan. And in that, there's the Economic Justice Index that's very explicitly called out in this new scorecard. And there's points assigned for areas that are in, it's a scale down from the most needy areas down to the least. There's also the neighborhood planning initiative that PDA is undergoing. There's going to be points for being in alignment with neighborhood plans that get released, and other things as well. So, in the North-South Metrolink alignment too, there's points awarded for whatever the future route becomes, developing along that route. So it hopes to complement other things that are going on throughout the city. And then one thing that's important, which we'll kind of go over to the right side of this slide, is that the scorecard just sets a ceiling, and there's 3 tiers based on the amount of points that you get. So you have to at least get to 30 points to qualify for any level of abatement at all. And then it kind of tiers upwards to tier 3, where you can receive the max abatement allowable. But once you hit a tier, that's the ceiling. And then we use the financial analysis to dial in on what the level of abatement truly should be. Next slide. And so here's just kind of showing like the scorecards. Essentially, there's 3 scorecards. One's residential, one's commercial, and one's mixed use. I didn't put the commercial on here because everything that's included on that is also in mixed use, except for one thing, but I don't think it's super important. So you can see there's categories where any project will get some points, but it might be very few points. Capital investment, where it's located, that kind of thing. But then there's a number of other things that they kind of have to make the decision to, take part in that. So improving the public infrastructure, remediating environmental conditions, adding affordable housing, doing something that completes a recommendation from the neighborhood plan, et cetera. So there's a mix of things in here. We can talk about any of them that you're curious about if you would like to. But we think this is a pretty good list of things that can benefit the community. I just put stars against ones that I kind of like or that I'll talk about in the next slide. So transit and affordable housing, I'll talk about in the next slide. The geography, that category is what I was talking about before, the Economic Justice Index. That's that category. And then on kind of the more commercial side, we award points for not only jobs, but also jobs that are quality. So they pay a livable wage, provide benefits, and are full-time. And then if you're doing a development that would have a business that's in one of our target industries, like advanced manufacturing or ag tech or geospatial or something like that, you would get rewarded for bringing that type of business to the city. Next slide. Okay, so not to just kind of show you how the scorecard looks in detail for a couple of the categories, I just pulled out these ones, which I think are interesting. So it's just structured to kind of have a paragraph about why that category is important and then how it would be scored. And so for transit access in particular, we kind of have some categories are just kind of binary, yes or no. It's like 0 or 5 points, but some of them have different levels of points that you can achieve. In the transportation access category, you get 3 points if you're within a quarter mile of a bus stop. Basically, is kind of assuming that a quarter mile is enough that it provides a decent ability to walk and take a bus to wherever you go. We also added the next piece of this table for the highest frequency bus route on Grand 70. Couple more points for that one, just basically because the higher frequency allows for hopefully more mobility. The next is if you're within actually a half mile of a Metrolink stop, you're getting 7 points so that we help support our rail system and provide good access to that. And then finally, kind of like I talked about before, you get the most points for building within a half mile of a future proposed north-south Metrolink station to hopefully begin the process of getting transit-oriented development around those stations and make that more successful going forward. Then on the other side, affordable housing, obviously, I think we all value that to some degree. There's, higher levels of points if you're providing deep affordability, so 30% to 60% AMI. But you're also, this has been used so far, and this is the kind of the idea of it is that, you might be doing an apartment project in Central West End, and you think that you need financially the level of some level of abatement, but you can't quite get to that 30 points level. If you include some level of affordability, like 10% of your units at 80% AMI, or maybe even more affordable, that might be able to get you into that tier 1 and be eligible for abatement on this new model. So hopefully we're not just building highly concentrated affordable housing developments going forward, but also incentivizing mixed income developments as well. So we can go on the next slide. And then I'll run this real quick. So desired outcomes of hopefully all this is that we do start to change development patterns to emphasize underinvested areas. We've always kind of done that, but hopefully we try to do that. We actually try to get some developments in areas that really need it, rather than just concentrating it all in central corridors and other things. And hopefully we mold all developments to include more benefit to the community so that we're always receiving a little bit more benefit other than just the building getting built, and hopefully down the line, an influx of additional tax dollars. And then generally, I think that having a scorecard like this, and the more and more we do projects like this, we're just kind of cultivating an environment of good, responsible development that thinks about its impact on the community. And while still doing that, we hope to continue to spur investment and do this all within the framework of this being more of a public-private partnership rather than a developer coming to us to extract something from us, or and us not getting anything in return. Hopefully it's more of a partnership that's mutually beneficial. And yeah, so we kind of hope this shifts the paradigm around incentives a little bit, and us viewing it more as us investing public dollars to achieve real estate related outcomes that can benefit us all, and not be as focused on what the developers are receiving from us. So that's it. If you got questions, you can get into anything you'd like. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Andrew. I think the easiest way for this is if the commissioner has any questions, because we have another unit that will speak to this. If you would just raise your hand, I'll acknowledge you. That way we don't have to go through the full roll, except for I will give Alderman Cone the courtesy, because I know he's on the phone and may not have access to the emoji. So Alderman Cone, if you have any questions, please let us know at this time. So not hearing from him right now. I hear Commissioner Boaz. I'll go ahead and identify you, recognize you now.
I thought Andrew had said that we were going to see the map that kind of explains the geography, or is that in the discussion of the next item?
We actually, I could pull that up, but I actually did not include that in anything that we just presented or sent to you.
Yeah, I think that's in the next map, Commissioner Boaz.
we can definitely, send you the link to the plan and we can we can refer you to that. Send it to you or refer you to where it's at.
Okay. At this time, I'm not seeing any other hands from commissioners. So I want to, I said, we'll hold off because the next item will kind of reference that, which I think Jonathan's making that presentation.
That's correct, Chair.
And it does come back to, it does parallel to this conversation, right?
Wait, what's the next part?
Is a blighting study.
Using this, okay, yeah. I did have a quick question.
Yes.
What, is there a formal process laid out for evaluating this tool after, say, the first year of use?
Yeah, so we haven't determined a timeline yet, but we've already started to kind of, I guess, accumulate what we think so far and plan to, and certain projects come up, it maybe doesn't score exactly how we would have intuitively thought it would. And so we've been telling everybody we expect this to evolve a lot. So I don't know what the timeline will be, but I expect that we will definitely make some at least minor tweaks relatively soon. If it's a year, it might be 6 months. Don't know. So and along those lines, we welcome feedback for sure. I will say it's a little tough to imagine. You try to incorporate everything that you think is important, and you try to assign points to that. You end up with a lot of categories. It can be kind of tough. Maybe you're getting some results you didn't expect, and it's just kind of tough when you're doing this in theory, and then projects start to come in, and you start to learn a little bit more, I think. So
Yeah, I think one of the toughest parts about designing a scorecard like this is weighting the categories. So it's just, you're gonna learn through.
yeah,
practice.
it's very challenging, very, very challenging.
And I don't believe the planning commission has any formal input, just us as regular people can provide feedback, right?
Right.
That's all my questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So based off the conversation, and I agree with the Commissioner Garmedia, there should be some kind of set review plan after a period of time to, ensure that all the I's are getting dotted, all the T's are crossed, and it's equitable across the board. And as you said, you implement something, you have to go back and review the project to be sure that it's doing what you asked to do. So thank you for that. And then Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. And good evening, all the commissioners. My name is Jonathan Roper, the City Planning Executive of Neighborhood Planning for the Planning and Urban Design Agency. And tonight we have a blighting study and redevelopment plan for several vacant residential buildings, a couple mixed-use commercial, and a couple vacant sites. Next slide, please. In the Dutchtown area, the petitioner, Marquette Homes, is seeking to renovate up to 60 units, or to result in 60 units, 1 to 3 bedrooms. Next slide, please. Last slide. And also, additionally, there are 2 sites that are LRA owned that PDA reviewed and worked with Elsie Ray to add to this also, that we're recommending for approval as well, which we'll have on the sites. Next slide. The first, just to give you a tour, we'll have the image of the site along with a map and just what it is. So the first one, you might see this beautiful eyesore of a building, is the Melba Theater at the 3,600 grand. That's just the rehab for commercial on the bottom, probably white space with residential on top. Next slide. And the second is on Merrimack. It's the rehab of a mixed-use building with commercial on the bottom and residential on top. And that sloop is specialty mixed use. Next slide. The next slides are a mix of residential, so just mostly rehabs. Next slide. And on Minnesota as well. Next slide. Just all vacant buildings, Pennsylvania. Next slide. Now we have a new construction expected here on a vacant lot. Next slide. And on this is several actual lots together, including starting on the left and an LRA lot that PDA is proposing to add to this redevelopment planning and blighting study on Ohio. Then there's several vacant lots and a house that is a I believe it's like a non-contributing house to the historic district, so that would be demoed and replaced with new housing. Next slide. This is also the house in the middle is under the proposed redevelopment area, and also to the vacant site just to the left is under LRA property that staff's asking. That's the second site to be added to this blighting a redevelopment plan. Next slide. And another vacant lot that would have new construction on it for housing. Next slide. And under staff looked at the strategic land use plan and found for most of the sites, they're under the neighborhood preservation area. So building either new housing or renovating housing would be in conformance. The Melba Theater that you saw along Grand, the first one, is under neighborhood commercial area, which would conform with having retail on the bottom along a major street, along with the specialty mixed use area along Merrimack, which had a mixed use building as well. Next slide. We also looked at the Gravel East Jefferson Historic Neighborhood Plan, where it does seek to redevelop housing at not only rehabs, but also new housing. Slide. And at this time, we have Elsie Ray on line. Well, of course, there's Andrew and also Zach Wilson's on the line. So if they have any additional comments I did not cover, they can as well. And also the petitioner's representative, Jess Henry with RISE Community Development as well.
All right. Thank you for that, Jonathan. I'll first recognize Andrew or Zach if they have any comments at this point.
Thank you, commissioners. The two additional lots that planning has a request as we add to the chapter 99 is CDA controlled. So they will be rehabbed here in the future. They were in a NOFA, and so it makes sense to make them part of this plan. So we fully accept their recommendation. We'll be adding those two to the plan.
And for the audio recording, that's Zachary Wilson with CD. And then I think the other person with RISE was Justin. Is that?
I'm sorry, Jess Henry.
Oh, Jess. Hey, Jess. We recognize Jess Henry if there's any conversation or comments that Jess would like to make on behalf of RISE at this point.
Hi there, and good evening, commissioners. I just want to thank you for the opportunity and here to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you. Then we'll go as we normally do. I'll entertain if Alderman Cohn's on, if he has any questions, I'll entertain those. We'll wait for him to come in. I know he's operating on phone once again. I'll hold for Alderman Ryan. Any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Boaz, any questions?
No questions.
Commissioner Bradley, any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Anderson, any questions? We'll hold for Commissioner Anderson if he comes back.
Sorry, no questions from Anderson.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Garmedia, any questions?
Thank you.
Commissioner Keong, any questions?
No questions.
Okay, the chair does have a question. There was a slide, Jonathan, you showed, and it went quickly, address 3922. It looked like a current that one right there. Can you go back over that housing again? Why?
Of course, sure. So the middle one there is one within the proposal, and then the vacant lot next door is the one that PDA would like to add on to it. So both of those were that was not unoccupied.
There's a house in the way in the back behind the trees right there. So may not be able to see it.
Okay. So that the 3922 is the physical address of the house we're looking at, the four family?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, is that occupied currently?
No, it's not.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to be sure I was understanding something there. With that, I have no additional questions. I'll entertain any, and Jonathan, could you review your recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. Staff finds that the Marquette Scattered Sites redevelopment plan is to be clear blighted, and the proposed redevelopment plan is found in conformity with the strategic land use plan and the adopted neighborhood plan, and PDA recommends approval of the redevelopment request.
So moved, Alderman Cone.
Second, Commissioner Boaz.
It's been moved by Alderman Cone, seconded by Commissioner Boaz. Call for vote.
Alderman Cone,
Aye.
Alderman Ryan,
Resoundingly.
Aye.
Commissioner Boaz,
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Garmendia,
Aye.
Commissioner Keung,
Aye.
Chair Strother.
Aye.
The motion passes with all present voting aye.
Thank you very much, commissioners, and we wish the best in this process. With that, one more item left on the agenda, which we get to hear from somebody by the name of Don, and he is actually standing at the mic and getting ready to present.
Yes, and I have a bet that I'm going to actually do this quickly, so I will.
You want to define quickly before you do?
The bet is for under 5 minutes. And I'm going to jump in. We do this occasionally where what we're coming to you is just getting your permission for staff under my direction to set a public hearing for an upcoming item. That is in essence what this is. So I'm going to be asking you to allow me to set a public hearing at my discretion, coordinating with other factors that go into setting this public hearing for a potential change to the master plan for Forest Park. So that's the ask tonight. I'll just give you some quick FYIs that what's in the works in Forest Park, it's been through COVID, is a design process with community outreach to do upgrades and improvements to the Steinberg Rink and Pavilion project. That design process is being quite robust, citizen engagement, and some things of it that are now being considered are things that aren't specified in the master plan, or there might be some restrictions in the master plan. So hence the potential for a change to the master plan. This project is underway. It includes some improvements. The Forest Park Advisory Board is part of this process. They're reviewing it. 3 members of the Planning Commission plus myself are a member of the advisory board. Major amendments to the Forest Park Master Plan, meaning the Forest Park Advisory Board has looked at it and said, yep, this reaches one of the levels where we as the Planning Commission must take up the item for amendment. This would be amendment number 4, such amendment that came to us for the Forest Park Master Plan. Next slide. And what I'm saying is there is this sequence of some work with the Parks Department and with Forest Park Forever. This is a funding project that they're doing significant fundraising in the community. There's design work. There'll be a meeting of the Forest Park Advisory Board.
Those were fire.
Did I just? Is that the party who I made the bet with?
Huh?
Yeah. Okay. Anyway. So we're going to do this sequence. I'll be participating in all of them.
You guys have some of the
by
best food.
retirement. And we just ask you that you let me
Alderman,
have-
let me stop you down. Alderman Cone, if you're listening, can you go ahead and mute?
Yeah.
Thank you.
He's the one I made the bet with. So was he extending my time? Huh,
No.
Okay. All right. With that, yes, we got some diligence to do between now and when we have a public hearing, including doing the advertisement for it, if it becomes from an action of the Forest Park Advisory Board that they want to bring to us or come to us, a amendment to the master plan. So that's all I have. Would ask your approval to give me permission to set up the arrangements for a public hearing if necessary.
I'll entertain any questions from the commissioners first, Don, but I do have a question that I want to ask. You mentioned yourself and 3 commissioners were on the master plan committee.
Yep.
Does that raise any conflict of interest if it comes before the commission?
Good point. We'll address it then.
Okay, thank you.
I tend to think it's complementary, so we'll look at the lawyer and address it then.
All right. Any other questions from the commissioner at this point? Okay, I'll entertain. So Don, your ask is that you have approval to conduct a presentation and public hearing in the future?
Yep.
I'll
So
entertain a
moved.
motion.
So moved, Commissioner Bradley.
Second, Boaz.
It's been moved by Commissioner Bradley, second by Commissioner Boaz. Call for vote.
Alderman Cone,
You can pass him.
Alderman
No,
Ryan,
you guys, you put me on mute. No, I'm kidding. Thank you.
Alderman Ryan,
Narines and I.
Commissioner Boaz,
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Garmendia,
Aye.
Commissioner Keung,
Aye.
Commissioner Strother.
Aye.
Motion passes with all present voting aye.
Very good. Don, can you see that?
Good. I do have a director's report to give.
Yes, sir. You can give it.
And that is, one, thank you for Miriam's hard work and the zoning office's hard work on the item relating to short-term rentals. Remember, Miriam's been here for a short time. The rest of us have been here for a longer time. She navigated that very well. Second, the position for the director of sustainability, which is in the civil service title, is city planning executive, was posted last Friday. That position has been vacant for a while, and I think a number of people are eager to apply for it. Glad it's posted. Pretty excited about that. And I want to thank, there were a number of commissioners that had some time constraints and parameters for tonight, and want to thank all of them that managed that to be able to effective. So we had a vote and a quorum during the entirety of this. And that really suffices as my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. And I want to echo to each of the commissioners. I know at times it is hard because of the quorum requirements, but you give your time and I'm very appreciative of that. And I try to be very respectful of your time and that we get things done appropriately. And you feel proud that you serve on this commission. So thank you for all your work. I hope everybody had a safe holiday, however you celebrated this past weekend. We will be meeting again in May the 10th. Information come out from the staff at that point. And Don, again, as you recognize your staff, we recognize you and your staff for all the hard work you do and putting up with us. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to end the meeting.
Make a motion to adjourn till.
Second.
It's been moved to second. Thank you for that. With that, wish everybody a good and productive week and be safe. Thank you very much. You can end the recording.
Thank you.
Stay tuned that we may invite you to be in person next time. We'd have a hybrid option, but we may invite you to be in person.
Ah, excellent. Have a good night, everybody.